everyone. This is State Representative Kate Lipper-Garabedian. Thank you for joining me for Conversations with Kate. I'm very excited to start out the new year with a great new podcast, talking with Sarah Hague from the Vote Mama group. I've been working with Vote Mama this legislative session on a really important bill, H3579, that we're going to talk about in a little bit. And I'm excited to elevate Sarah's voice and let folks know a little bit more about Vote Mama, an organization that's focused on breaking down the barriers moms face when running for office, normalizing moms of young children running for office, and advocating for policies for working families. They've been a wonderful thought partner this session on the bill that we're working on together. Sarah, as Chief Program Officer, comes from a really great background with an interesting intersection of social work and policy. Spending a lot of your career engaging young adults and women in government and politics. Sarah started youth advisory boards for 4 Congress members, mobilizing over 500 students. At Vote Mama Foundation, she spearheads the organization's work on passing campaign funds for childcare in all 50 states. And that's exactly what the bill that we're working on together would do, allowing for political candidates for state and local office here in Massachusetts to use campaign funds for their childcare needs related to their elections and their campaigning. So Sarah, why don't you start out by just walking us through a little bit of your personal and professional background and what got you interested in this intersection of, you have a really, strong background in social work and you're really applying it in the policy space. And I'd love to learn more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me on today. I'm so happy to be here. What a great way to start off the new year. So as you mentioned, my background is in social work. That's the education I received. But I got my start in politics at the ripe age of 15 when my member of Congress started the first congressional youth cabinet in the country. It was made up of high schoolers across the district in my home state of Connecticut, because he wanted to get the input and policy ideas from youth in his congressional district, because he was making policies that impacted us without our input and without our ideas, because we couldn't vote yet. So every one Saturday a month, I would meet with the congressman and a group of peers from across the district and talk about our fear of student loan debt and our fear of lockdown drills at our schools. And he would bring guests in to talk to us about what we could be doing about registering our colleagues and peers at the high school to vote, and how we could be activated and feel empowered civically. And that really changed the game for me. That experience showed me that my voice is important and powerful and impactful in government and in politics, and that the system isn't necessarily easy to navigate, but it is navigatable and it is powerful when you know who to talk to about what, and change can be made. So I went on to college. I studied social work, sociology, and peace and conflict studies. I knew I wanted to work in government and in politics. And I wanted to study policy from a different perspective than, poli-sci might give a student. I wanted to know how policy impacts people and how people impact policy. And that's exactly what a social work degree gives you. It shows you a systems perspective, we call it. So how does the micro individual impact their family, impact the community, all the way up to the macro, impact their state, impact their country, and all the way back down? How do the laws of a country impact a community and impact an individual? So you have to do a practicum to graduate with the social work degree. I did mine at a congressional district office, which started out this niche career path for me of working in multiple congressional district offices. I did the same for my graduate degree and ended up going from intern to chief of staff for a member of Congress in New York City within a 6-year period. And I absolutely loved the work of helping constituents navigate federal agencies, and making sure that our community knew what resources were available, and if resources that were needed were unavailable, figuring out how to get those resources to our voters.
That's great.
Yeah, and I then went on to join Vote Mama, and I would love to talk more about the work that we're doing and how we're working with you on issues like campaign funds for childcare. So please What other questions
Yeah.
do you have?
Well, I think also one thing I just note is it's really, I hope viewers or listeners rather, especially some of the younger listeners or folks, who we interface with, and, my staff and I'll certainly think about this as well. Just hearing about your career path into policy work and also working in an office. It's really, I think, an asset when, some folks do poli-sci in, undergrad, but I think a social work degree, to your point, provides a really critical perspective on thinking about how people really need to be at the center of the policy work on what we're doing. And that, dovetails really nicely into Vote Mama. And if I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the organization and your mission and policy priorities.
Yeah, absolutely. So our organization started in 2019 after our founder and CEO, Luba Gretchen Shirley, ran for Congress when her kids were just 1 and 3. She ran in 2018 and she realized she couldn't afford to pay for childcare for her young kids out of pocket because she had given up her full-time salary to run for Congress, like many, many candidates for federal office and even state office do. So she petitioned the Federal Election Commission to use her campaign funds on childcare, and it was unanimously and bipartisanly approved, and it paved the way for federal candidates to use their campaign funds for childcare. There weren't, however, a ton of moms with young kids running for office or serving in office. So when she was searching for folks to talk to who had the lived experience that she was facing, who knew what unique barriers moms with young kids are up against when running for and serving in elected office. There were a handful of folks like, Congresswoman Grace Meng, Senator Elizabeth Warren, Senator Gillibrand, who had that experience and talked about, this is how I manage my calendar. This is how I build forts while doing call time, right? Get this headset so that you can get your hair done by your young daughter while asking donors to invest in your campaign. So after her congressional campaign, she launched Vote Mama to be a resource and to support moms with young kids running from school board to U.S. Senate across the country, and to research why more moms aren't running for and serving in office. At Vote Mama Foundation, we are often, when we first launched, we'd been asked, well, how many, what's your baseline? Well, how many moms do you need to, see in office for it to be a win? And we realized that the number of moms with minors or caregiver status were included when evaluating the diversity of our decision-making bodies at the state or the federal levels. So we did that research, and we found that only 7% of members of Congress are moms with minor kids. To put that in context, there are 3 times as many men named John serving in the U.S. Senate than moms of minors. There are more millionaires in Congress than there are moms of young kids. So it begs the question, why are our policies failing moms and failing kids in our country? Because there's not the lived experience of motherhood, of different birthing stories, or of trying to afford childcare out of pocket, right? All of these things aren't at the decision-making table. At the state level, it's only 5% nationally.
Wow.
Are moms of young kids. In Massachusetts in 2022, there are only 4% of legislators in Massachusetts were moms with kids under 18.
Got it.
So
Well,
we
I
are
didn't know I was in
missing
such a small
you.
group.
You
Yeah.
are in such a small minority, and
Yeah.
that's why we exist, to look at that, to show that moms with young kids are underrepresented. And to put that in context for the listeners, by the time American women are 45, 85% are mothers. 85% have kids. So proportionally, we are way, way underrepresented, right? And when
Sure.
moms aren't at the decision-making table, the conversations are not as full as they should be, and policies aren't as full as we should be. So here at Vote Mama, we know now the baseline. We know that moms are underrepresented, and we are looking at the reasons and the sets of barriers why moms aren't running for office and why moms aren't serving in office. We know those are 2 separate sets of barriers. The set of running for office is being able to afford it. being able to afford childcare out of pocket, when childcare can cost as much as a mortgage, as you know. Paying for it out of pocket while on the campaign trail can be a huge financial barrier for caregivers running for office, not just moms, but everyday working caregivers to run for office. And then for serving in office, the system wasn't built for caregivers with young kids, especially moms. So we're looking at things like virtual participation and legislator salary, and are there changing rooms at the Capitol, right? These very tangible structural changes that can be made to make it more sustainable for moms to serve in office once they get there.
That makes a lot of sense. And so given, having done some work on access and diversity initiatives in higher education, I think something we always talk about is exactly what you are referencing when you're in a decision-making body or working to perfect a product or do, good in the world. Having diversity of perspective and experience is really critical. There's a lot of scientific research on this point that shows that, diverse groups working on professional goals have better outcomes. And so I've been really proud to work with you, as well as Representative Dan Hunt, another legislator who has young children, on filing House Bill 3579. And there's another House bill and Senate bill also in this space that would allow for any candidate at the state or local level running for office, because we've already, thanks to Vote Mama's founder, our federal candidates can use their campaign funds for childcare. We filed bills that would clarify and confirm that at the state and local levels as well, candidates can use campaign funds for childcare related expenses, related to their campaigns. And, just for listeners, I haven't, but I could go to Nordstrom and buy a nice ball gown for a gala that I go to in my capacity as a candidate for office, and that would be allowable. But I could not seek someone to cover the costs of caring for my children while I'm gone if my husband's not available, or if I'm a single mother or a single father. And that just doesn't make any sense at all. So let's talk a little bit about that and why. And I think you already have talked about why it's really essential to remove that barrier. It's an unnecessary one. It does prohibit, or make people feel sort of a little bit more hesitant about the financial obligations they're undertaking to run for office. And I think you've already sort of underscored why that's important. Maybe you could also let listeners know about how other states are handling this, because there's quite a groundswell happening now, is there not, across the country?
There is, absolutely. So we just passed our 30th state to allow candidates to use their campaign funds on childcare. So we have 20 to go. Massachusetts is one of those 20. And these states are states like New York, Connecticut, Delaware, but also states like Montana, West Virginia, Arkansas, states with vastly different political makeup. But there's bipartisan support for this initiative so that more working class, everyday folks can decide whether they want to run for office and represent their community and advocate for families just like theirs in state legislatures or in city council or school boards, right? There's a huge groundswell of support on this. And we know that we've been doing the research on how many candidates are using campaign funds on childcare at the state and federal levels. And we know that there's a huge increase in usage by candidates when this is available. When campaign funds can be used on childcare, candidates will use it. But we also know that candidates, out of all those 30 states, there have been no instances of abuse, because raising money for a campaign is hard work. I ran for town board in my town in Connecticut last year, and I was raising money for it. And it's hard to ask people to invest in your vision for your community, right? To pay for your campaign with your hard-earned dollars. And you have to make decisions about where that money goes. Is it going to staff? Is it going to yard signs? Is it going to mailers? How are those funds being spent to the end of getting into office, right? For parents, childcare is just as essential of a campaign component as a campaign manager, as those mailers, as those yard signs. But a candidate is having to decide, with limited funds where those are going. And they have to answer to how they're utilizing those funds to the public because the campaign finance reporting laws require that every dollar be accounted for publicly. So they have to answer to their constituents, to their voters, to their opponent, to their party about how much of their funds they're using for childcare versus polling versus gala tickets, right?
Right.
It's looped into any other campaign finance expense, but it really can make the difference for who is able to seek a seat at a table. And we know that when moms have a seat at the table, the conversations change and the decisions change and the priorities change. If we want to support children, we need to help elect more moms. If we want to uplift communities, we need to invest in moms. And we need moms and dads of young kids at the decision-making table, leveraging their lived experience in these very important decisions that are being made that impact families across the state.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just as someone who has campaigned, the first time I was pregnant with my second child, and in both cases, there were times, the thing that I invested the most in, and maybe you did as well, is your time. It's trying to hit doors and be at events and be out in the public. That's how, it's intensive, it's time intensive. It's also the best way for people to get to know you, to understand your vision, for you to hear from your potential constituents and reflect on what you are hearing from them. There's nothing, more valuable than actually being in all three dimensions when you're campaigning. And if you're a mom or a parent with young children, you have to consider, where will they be while I'm trying to be available to do this work? So that's why I'm just really excited to be working with you, building on the efforts, so many successful efforts now that you've accomplished in the other states to push forward on this bill, this legislative session. Thank you for joining me at the State House to testify on the bill and the concept before the Joint Committee on Elections. We anticipate that the committee will need to make a decision in the coming 6 weeks or so about a favorable review or not. I know that we're also working to plan an event at the State House to just raise greater awareness of it. And I'm really hopeful that we'll continue to see some real momentum here. It's not ideal that Massachusetts is now in the bottom, behind the curveball here, or the 8-ball rather, of all these other states. But we've got a really great team working on this, and I'm so glad to be working on it with you.
Likewise, and we are so proud to have your lived experience as a mom serving in office and running for re-election in this narrative of why it is so important that people like you have a seat at the table, and your legislative agenda and priorities are the proof that when moms are elected, they fight for families, they fight for kids, and they fight for their communities. So thank you so much for all of the work that you do and for having me on today.
Thank you, Sarah. So we're starting out a new year. Not sure, maybe we'll get out of here on this one. I know we both have one resolution, which is to see House Bill 3579 get to the finish line this session. Any other resolutions or New Year traditions you enjoy during the winter season?
Yes, so every year I make a vision board. I stock up on magazines throughout the year, and I sit by a fire and cut out pictures that represent some resolutions and try to visualize what my year might look like. It's a great arts and craft, but also a great way to set some goals.
Yeah.
How about you?
Oh, goodness.
What are yours?
Well, one of mine this year is to do a better job of keeping, sort of a gratitude / just sort of memory journal.
I love that.
It's interesting that you mentioned this vision board and the concept of sort of like goals and maybe setting intentions for a holistic new year. I actually did a community conversation that's still on my YouTube page about this, and had folks from the library system come, arts and culture, mental health, physical health, and just sort of discuss how, setting these intentions early in the year can be really impactful. So I've never done a vision board before, but I might have to consider that at some point.
I highly recommend it.
That's great
it's
to
good
know.
Fun.
Okay.
And getting your kids involved makes it even more fun.
Right. So Everyone, thank you for listening to this Conversations with Kate. I've been so pleased to be talking with Sarah Hague, the Chief Program Officer for Vote Mama. We're working together on making campaign funds permissible for use with childcare. And I'm excited to see where this issue goes and hopeful for a successful session. Everyone, thanks for listening, and please